Training camp's here. It is
Yep.
as a free agent trying to get back in to do one more crack at this thing. It's my first training camp in a very long time, not being in since like 6th grade. So it's a weird feeling. I'm really happy for those guys that are in training camp now. I don't miss ramming my head into people and sweating and cramping and all that good stuff. But hopefully I can get back in this league and give it one more shot. I feel great, and it's cool to see all the Eagles fans at the stadium last night and juice around the league, and it's so much good buzz around the NFL.
Well, I wanted to get your take on that because, as you said, you'd like to get one more crack at training camp. You've been in training camp. Let me see if I can rattle off a few. The Giants, the Bears, obviously Carolina, which is where you played for 3 seasons. Last year, you were in Minnesota with the Vikings. If I missed a team, I apologize. But what are these training camps like? Give the listeners a little indication of what goes on at these camps, how important they are. When you hear someone's having a good camp, does that mean anything? So give our listeners a little insight as a guy who's been to multiple training camps as a player.
So usually your roster's set from about 1 to 35, 1 to 40, and that's going to leave you about 13 spots for people to make the roster. So 13 spots will be available. That could be your 3rd corner. That could be your 4th receiver. What are those guys going to be able to do on special teams, right? Like everyone's like, well, they're a special teams player. Well, that's not how they made the league. Guys aren't making the league as special teams players. They're making the league because they're great players in college, and then their toughness and their durability and their willingness to do whatever it takes to make the roster. Adam Thielen in Minnesota was barely undrafted. He blocked the punt. All of a sudden, he had an opportunity to play 4th wide receiver. At one point in time, he was a top 5, top 10 receiver in the league, right? So special teams are massive for guys. That's where you see a lot of linebackers get their name, and all of a sudden they become a starter. So you're fighting for a couple spots, and the practice squad's expanded now. So they're always keeping about 70 guys in the building out of the 90 because certain players going to injury reserve too. So just a little insight there on how many guys are competing for jobs and different things are going for it. But it's a good opportunity. These joint practices, from a player's perspective, they're not that fun. You get to compete and all, but like guys are taking cheap shots and there's really nothing to lose. Like you can let up a touchdown and you don't win or lose the practice. So it's definitely unique and interesting. They've evolved. I think we're on our way to 2 preseason games, Mike, and 18 regular season games to give us a round of 20. That's happening sooner than later. It's going to be interesting to see what the players are going to get back, get paid more, and maybe some grass fields instead of turf.
Give me your take now, Colin. You mean you played in exhibition games just last season. You were wearing the purple and yellow of the Minnesota Vikings. What do those games mean now for the players? What do you think is going to materialize now? Now you got a little bit of a feeling of the 3 games situation. What are those games going to look like?
Yeah, so if I'm a starter, if I'm a guy, let's say I'm Jalen Hurts, I am doing my full pregame routine. I am doing my full pregame meal. I'm going through I'm looking at the clock. Everything's dialed in, right? I eat at this time. I stretch at this time. I get a massage at this time. I see the chiropractor. I'm going through all that stuff as a starter. I'm going out for warm-ups, so they're allowing me. I'm doing my normal warm-up, and then, hey, take your pads off. You're done for the day. Because you need to start repping what it's going to be like in season. That routine is so key for a player to manage your stress and anxiety levels because there's so much going on in your life in season. Now, for a player like me, it means the world. A guy who's on the bottom of the roster, you need to go and produce. But you can't really focus on the production part. You got to really focus on all that cliche, like boring stuff of doing my job and lining up correctly and being physical. And I think the really hardest part is for these guys that go in the 3rd and 4th quarter. You're ice cold on the sideline for like 2 to 3 hours, then you have to go play your best football. That's really challenging, very challenging. It's something you're not used to doing. So it's a great opportunity for these guys trying to make the bottom of the roster. And it's a shame they've taken preseason games away. It hurts these guys, but feeder leagues like the UFL, CFL have helped that as well.
All right, so what about the top end guys? You're in Minnesota last year, Kirk Cousins, Justin Jefferson.
Yeah.
Do they want to play in these preseason games? Like, what's their feeling? What's the feeling of the guys who have made the team who don't play in these games? Do they feel that they don't need to play in them, or do they want to play in them, but they know the risk is just not worth it?
I don't want to speak for every player, but I didn't even want to play in them, Mike, and I was the bottom of the roster guy, and I needed them. Like, you don't want to play in them. Let's be honest. You're not making any money. Like, you don't make any money in the preseason. Like, I know everyone's like, it's not about the money. Well, yeah, it is. It's your profession. We pay taxes like everybody else, a lot of taxes. So you make like a couple grand maybe in preseason, and then in season when you make the roster, that's when the real money kicks in. So no, those guys, they're just hanging out. They don't want to play in those games.
They don't want to, so they don't want to play. But like, there's a lot of conversation, like he's got to get his reps and his game speed. Like that game speed is not the same game speed, though, is it?
You can mimic it in practice with these joint practices, and everyone's a lot safer, right? You can go red zone, like versus the Vikings in joint practice for the Eagles, say. You can go red zone period, ones versus ones, full speed, live, other than the quarterback, right? They won't go live, but they'll go thud, which is pretty much full speed, and don't bring anybody to the ground. So my point is, as a starter, I don't think so. I think everyone's like, oh, it's sloppy early in the year. There's still sloppiness at the end of the year. It's football. It's one of the hardest sports and the hardest sport in the world, probably other than golf, right? So at the end of the day, no, if I'm a starter, I'm not playing. I got pulled from a game in Carolina when I was in my better years there. I only played like the first quarter, and that was like I made it moment. I thought I was going to play in the league for 50 years after that. So ever since then, Mike, I've been playing in fourth quarters and getting out there with guys like 10 years younger than me. But it's all good, man. It's great to be in that league. It's a blessing. And for those veterans, no, they don't want to play in those games.
Colin Thompson, NFL free agent tight end here on the Sports Bash. And, of course, getting ready for another season. You've been kind of watching things. Earlier, Chris Canny on Sportsmanlike said the Commanders will go from worst to first in the NFC. And that would say that they're better than Philadelphia and Dallas potentially. Do you see any team other than Philly and Dallas in the NFC East being able to, obviously the Giants or Washington, being able to make that jump?
So a lot of people in the Philly area, for whatever reason, hate Colin Cowherd. I'm a huge Cowherd fan. I think he's really articulate, and I think he builds different arguments that have some base to him. You don't have to agree with him, but I think he's a really smart guy, really good at radio, obviously. He always says this: who's your owner? Who's your general manager? Who's your head coach? Who's your quarterback? The Washington Commanders addressed all those positions with literally five-star guys. I know Dan Quinn personally. The guy's an elite coach and motivator and a great human being. He's a South Jersey guy himself. Huge Dan Quinn fan. Jane Daniels is a stud. Peters comes over from the Niners. And we know the ownership group for Washington, right? They own the Devils and they own the Sixers. So I'm a huge fan of all those moves. Not the fact that they took one of the best offensive linemen away from Washington, Tyler Biadasz. They took Allegretti away from Kansas City, who was really good for them. They have great weapons offensively. Ecker, Robinson, McLaurin, Dotson. I mean, even backup quarterback-wise. I mean, I know it's Marcus Mariota. I get that. Jeff Driscoll. They're starting to work on that bottom of the roster, too. They have the two-stud interior linemen. Lugu's a monster at linebacker. Wagner's a monster at linebacker. They brought over Jeremy Chin. Like, that roster is way improved. And I think, Mike, they're right at 500, above 500 football club.
Well, Colin, I've been saying this a lot. If Jaden Daniels is C.J. Stroud, like that quarterback that he's not C.J. Stroud, but I'm just saying meaning he was the second pick, not the first guy. So he's under the radar from Caleb Williams. Can he take that team and make them make the jump that Houston made last year?
My biggest question for you, Mike, or not for you, just really for the football world would be, what's Cliff Kingsbury going to do offensively to make him comfortable? Like Bobby Slowick and with the Texans, C.J. Stroud looked very comfortable. He only threw interceptions last year, C.J. Stroud, in 3 football games. He threw 5 all season, which is astronomical, like literally astronomical. Yeah. So like 10 picks in the league is like really good. He threw 5. So like he was comfy in that offense. Like what's Cliff going to do? Are they going to spread it out like they did in Arizona? So yeah, if I'm a Philly fan, I think Dallas is underrated. When I was looking at the Dallas roster yesterday doing serious, I'm like, actually, they got some dudes out there. Everyone's kind of like ripping Dallas, like, oh, whatever. That team's pretty damn good.
Well, it's not the talent. It's and you could speak to this then. It's not the talent. How much does that stuff cloud a team? The contracts, all that buzz. You've been around that, man. When a guy wants a contract, well, what's that do to a team?
Yeah, I was in Minnesota last year with T.J. Hawkinson when he did a hold in and got a huge monster contract. Honestly, you're so focused on playing, you don't really care. Like it's more of a media thing. Like you can't worry about anything else other than you because it's such a hard game. Like you can't. Like any great player, you can't think about anything but playing. At least when you're inside the building, right? To the best of your knowledge. I'm not talking about being a human. So I think Cowboys, like they're going to be really good. I think the Eagles, talent-wise, are the best in the division. Obviously, I think they're coming off another year of experience. They made aggressive moves this offseason. I'm a Devin White fan. I think he's going to play well. I think Huff is an absolute monster, an underrated player. They're going to miss Hassan Reddick and his leadership, but that's just a part of this game. And he was obviously going to hold out, right? So that's probably why they moved him to South Jersey Camden guy. It's tough to see him go, Temple product. But for me, Mike, yeah, Washington's legit. This is not the Commanders where it's like, oh, we're 7-9 and whatever, the old days, 7-10. This is a Commanders team that's going to be really good, really tough, and they're going to play hard for Dan Quinn.
Yeah, so it's funny you say that real quick. You mentioned Temple guy Reddick, our intern today, Hayden. He puts together the board for the guests, and he said, "Colin Thompson, the Temple guy." I said, "Yeah, you know him." He's like, "He went to Temple." Yeah, I forgot he went to Temple. So you are well known with the interns here, Colin Thompson.
Wow.
You played in New York. You were with the Giants at one point. Now, not with this regime, but what do you make of the Hard Knocks Giants stuff? Have you been watching any of that and given some insight to knowing that you've been a player and you've been in the draft process and the training camp and hearing some of the stuff and seeing what's going on?
Well, listen, that is about as good as a franchise you're going to find when it comes to how they treat their players, and it's about as first class as you're going to get with the Mara family. They're kind of tied into Pittsburgh. Minnesota was awesome too. Folks, every organization is not the same. They're all different. They're all ran differently. They all have different owners who cut checks. Giants are first class. I was thoroughly confused why a lot of that stuff got out. I think they were trying to show that, hey, listen, we thought a lot of this through, and this is what we're doing, and here's the direction. Like, their transparency was almost jarring.
I'll tell. Let me see if you agree as a player. Joe Shane didn't want to bring back Saquon, but he didn't want to disrespect him. He's saying, "Yeah, go out," but he had no interest in bringing Saquon back, right?
I don't I'm just blown away that got out. I don't want to
exactly.
I don't want to believe it.
I think Joe Shane said, "Look, in Buffalo, you hired me. I never paid a running back in Buffalo. Why do you want me to pay this guy $30 million?"
Yeah, I think C-Mac, Saquon, they're different people. Like, the running backs don't get paid as a whole, yes, but about 3 or 4 of them deserve to be paid way higher than their market value, in my opinion. If not, I'd have a committee situation, right? Last year, Swift, Gainwell, right? Even though Swift's very good back. To me, the Giants situation, I'll tell you what. Yeah, the Giants, right? It's a little sloppy, but they're pretty clear cut what they're going to be. Like, their offensive line with bringing in Runyon, local guy Jimmy Morrissey, Austin Slotman, like Evan Neal, Andrew Thomas, like their O-line got a lot better, and their D-line is about as good as you're going to find in the NFL, especially bringing in Brian Burns, Dexter Lawrence. They've had high picks in the past with them. So, again, it's a little overblown.
You play with Brian Burns, right? You play with Brian Burns,
yeah,
right?
I play with Brian Burns. Like, he's a problem. Like, they're going to present some problems, big-time problems. Like, the NFC East is not going to be a cakewalk. I think Daniel Jones, too. And listen, Dayball, they're all up against their job. Him and Jones are fighting for their jobs. So, and I'll say this too, Mike. Lastly, Giants, they're not a dumb organization. Like, they're pretty smart individuals. I don't know how that stuff got out, Mike. I'm shocked, but I think it's got to be on purpose. I don't know the reason why, but it's on purpose.
Yeah, well, and the whole Shane. So it's weird. Like, the Shane thing, I think he was doing his job. Like, we're not signing a running back. And Mara is showing his loyalty. Like, yeah, I'd really hate to lose Saquon Barkley. He's the most popular guy we have. But that's Joe Shane being like, I don't care if he's the most popular guy we have. You're not paying him $30 million. You know what I mean? Like, so it gave you some really, and then it's obvious they wanted a quarterback at the draft.
Yeah. I think you got to start with the rookie quarterbacks. Like, to me, like, even Dallas, like, yeah, you got to pay Dak. Like, people forget how good Dak is, and they're like, oh, the playoffs. Like, I get all that too. But it's all like who's healthy in the playoffs and who's hot. Like, at the end of the day, I yes, it wins matter, but for quarterbacks, it is a win and loss stat. But like, who's around you? What's the context? So for Dak, like, you're going to pay him a ton of money. You're going to pay all those 3 guys, Micah and CeeDee Lamb. Well, that's like half of your team in 3 people, right? The Niners are going to run in that too with Brock Purdy eventually. What are they going to do with him? So, like, if you're the Eagles and you sign Jalen Hurts that extension, you're smiling right now. I think he's like the 7th highest paid quarterback in the NFL. And every year these quarterbacks get paid, and with Jalen is a better year and makes that deal look way better with Jalen Hurts and more cap friendly. So interesting stuff for the NFL business wise. And those teams, some teams are spending money. I think Dallas ends up paying all 3 of them.
Colin Thompson, NFL free agent tight end, is with us here on the Sports Bash. The Eagles obviously had their night last night out on the field and everything. What will Kellen Moore do to change their offense?
I think you're going to see a lot more shift in motion. I mean, you're already seeing it be leaked from Twitter and all that stuff. Last year, they really didn't do a lot of shift in motion, and I think teams would dial up some blitzes on them, and they really couldn't disguise them pre-snap, right? So if you motion a guy across the formation, say a receiver that was in the slot, and he goes to the other slot, if the safeties don't rotate, right, there's probably pressure coming from somewhere. If the safeties rotate, it's probably some sort of zone or man-to-man. Like, there's different tells in football to show you when you motion and shift what's going to happen. If you motion and shift and the defensive line does not adjust, probably going to be pressure because the pressure's coming from that way or whatever it may be. But if the D-line adjusts, they're in some sort of base defense, right? So you're going to see some pre-snap stuff. I mean, I think you're going to see a lot of the similar stuff because you got to do what Jalen does well, which is playing the gun and have that RPO option off of it. But Kellen's a high achiever as a player. This guy was an absolute animal as a college football quarterback at Boise. He was dominant. And he's been a great coordinator in a lot of different places. He's been around a lot of minds that are sharp too. So I don't know, like the cat's not out the bag yet. We won't see that till week 1, but I think you're going to see a lot more shift in motion, and then they're going to use all their pieces, right? Like Gainwell's a good backup. Obviously, you're going to see a ton of Saquon and all the wideouts. Goddard's a monster, right? There's a few people like him in the NFL. So they have a lot of really shiny toys, and they got a great O-line. They got a lot of assets on the offensive side of the ball we all know about.
It'll be interesting to see what happens with Mekhi Becton, man. That dude's an animal. They're playing him at right guard right now. That's a big man to play right guard.
Yeah, I mean, it's huge, right? So that's the key to it, right? Like in those spread offenses, though, all the balls are like lateral. They're like they're not shots not really on over the middle of the field. So, but one will hit him in the top of the head. I can guarantee you that. He's a monster. He bends well. We'll see what he does. They always add depth. It's a smart move by Howie. Becton plays well. He'll get a huge contract somewhere else, and Howie would do probably another similar thing, stopgap situation at this position.
There was the one other James Bradbury, that whole situation.
I loved his press conference, Mike.
Okay, well, I'm interested to get your take as a guy who obviously played. And Bradbury had a bad year last year. He admitted it. Like, I didn't play well last year. Are you surprised, though? No, he went to them apparently and said, can I try to play safety? Knowing that, hey, but don't you think Vic Fangio would want to see for himself, like, hey, let me see if there's something left in this guy? Or do you think they kind of like said, we don't have anything for you, man. You want to play safety? Go for it.
I think you just know as a player, like, hey, they draft you. Like he said everything. That was such a pro answer. Like, if you look at those comments when he said what he said, like, hey, listen, I know I need to play position. I played cornerback in this league at a high level. I never played safety before. I know we have some good safety. He said, we got great safeties too. He said, we have 2 starting corners and we have 2 starting safeties, and I'm the odd man out, so I'm going to learn them both. And that's a value to me. Like a veteran in the room who's played a lot, like remove the emotion of it from last year, which I know it's hard for a fan not to be emotional. He didn't play his best year. He admitted it. But at the end of the day, we have Reed Blankenship, Gardner Johnson, Quinyon Mitchell, Isaiah Rodgers, Sidney Brown, Avonte Maddox, Darius Slay. You start wow, that's a really good room. Like that's like the best room in the NFL, right? One of them.
Yeah.
So I think that's great. They're crazy to get rid of him, especially a cap casualty issue. So he'll probably make the team, and he'll be a depth player, and he'll probably play 50% of the snaps. But he's an older player, highly paid, and they'll put him in a good role and a mentor role for these young guys. Because obviously, after that press conference, he's a good leader.
All right, Colin Thompson, everybody.